नमस्ते। तो ये बनते बनते एक प्रकार की ट्रायोलॉजी जिसमें पहले दिन हम लोगों ने श्री अरविंद फर्स्ट डे सॉरी योर हिंदी induced me to my love for Hindi. Okay, so the first day we spoke about Sri Aurobindo's work with the past, which was important, necessary, because the past has to be released. There are many precious pearls in it, and they had to be used, picked up, taken up, and integrated with the new life that he had come to give to earth and men. In the second, humanity had been caught up in its own web, its web of the mind and the vital, which had created a superstructure of civilization without adequate foundation, because the foundation was lying low and made to believe that it is not a foundation at all. So the result was that the world was progressing rapidly towards a disaster. It had erected a superstructure, just like in days of old Atlantis, or in far back days in our own myth we hear about Lanka, which had built a whole golden city, but it lacked the foundation. So when the foundation is missing, you can be sure that today or tomorrow the building is going to crumble. And that's exactly what was the situation 100 years back. The vital and mind of man together had colluded to create a superstructure, and Sri Aurobindo had to show it the way, and he spoke of it as an evolutionary crisis, and he started releasing new lines of forces along which the world should move, and move not only towards a better and fairer world, but towards a diviner world, which he foresaw is coming. So we see one of the works with regard to the future, one of the most important works. Sri Aurobindo spoke of it as his most important work, and that is Savitri. And Savitri, incidentally, she is the. There are many, timings according to which sun is given a name. So there are many names of the sun. So there is the sun which is hidden in the night. There is sun which is early dawn. There is sun which is, rising up in the sky. Then there is sun which is in its fullness. Then there is a sun which is setting. There is a name for a sun which is hidden in the darkness. So all these are different names of the sun. And Savitri is actually the name of the sun as it is beginning to emerge from the night. So he was not just writing Savitri, he was invoking this sun hidden in the darkness, of which the Vedas speak of. And this was his most important work, which was for humanity to take a leap beyond the human or the animal human to the divine superhumanity of the future. So we see in Pondicherry, once the issue of India's independence was basically settled, he started launching on this work. And yesterday we spoke about the creation of a Deva Manava, Deva Shristi, a god-like creation in which the gods were to participate, lift humanity upward. Yet that humanity lifted nearer to the gods is not enough, because we know that it will still be an overmind creation. And though people would be much more, in every way powerful, knowledgeable, much better forces will be at play, yet it will be still it will be subject to an eventual, at some point of time, it will be threatened by a disintegration, because it's not the perfection. So we see Sri Aurobindo launching on that work, and which obviously none could understand, because people see things which are tangible, but they do not see the intangible movements which prepare the tangible things. So often we take the example of Shri Krishna on the chariot. So alone, Shri Krishna is running the whole show on Mahabharata, on the Kurukshetra war, and the only one who knows it, and knows it by half, is Arjuna. That too because he has been told that Shri Krishna himself shows him that it is me who is the one behind everything. Otherwise, no one else knows. So we see with Sri Aurobindo that during that phase, very little is known about him. Whatever little we have is through his poems, through his writings, through some of his, letters to the disciples. They asked him repeatedly, what are you doing? What are you up to? And with his own characteristic way, he would give certain indications which none would understand. For example, people would ask about supermind, and Sri Aurobindo would tell them that, look, it is descending, and I can see the tail of it. And then people would ask, surely this year it must have come. Every birthday, see, till 1926, every birthday they would ask Sri Aurobindo, and he would say, next year I will tell you. Then again they will ask Sri Aurobindo, they'll say, yes, yes, it is coming. Sir, when will it come? And Sri Aurobindo kept that question hanging for a long time. And the reason is that it is a completely radical leap. It was not just creating a better human being, but such a radical leap for which humanity was not prepared. And that's why, in that course of time, one of the biggest gifts that Sri Aurobindo gave to the earth is integral yoga. So, integral yoga is not another system of yoga. People often ask that, there are so many yogas. Obviously, to give yet another yoga had no meaning if the goal was the same, which is mukti. So he makes it very clear in one of his letters that I am not here to create mutts or sannyasis, but I am here to call the souls of the strong to the Leela of Krishna and Kali. So he has come here for a new Leela, to the Leela of Krishna and Kali. There is a new game, there is a new play. It literally, we can look at it like that. The play has been upgraded. When the play is upgraded, there is much greater, we may use the word danger, much greater challenge, if we put it, but much greater delight. So this was the challenge before him, and he didn't come here to establish an ashram, and he had to use the word ashram for want of a better name, because when you make a place, that's what Sri Aurobindo said, that I am using this word for want of a better name, and the word comes from the root shram, which means labor of another kind. When Arjav, the poet, the British mathematician who became a poet, when he was asked by some of his friends, what are you doing there exactly? So people often ask, they've asked me also, what are you doing there, doc? You're seeing patients, what? Yes, I'm seeing patients. So what is the difference? Why can't you continue with the Indian Air Force and see patients? So Arjav gave a very interesting reply. He said, will you understand if we say that we are grappling with our egos and fighting with it? Now, you see, of course, one could fight with the ego even outside. Even if you don't fight with the ego, others will hit your ego so hard that you'll be compelled to fight for it. So what was special? Why was he creating this place, this taposthali? See, this important work of Sri Aurobindo, which is meant for the future. Someone asked Nalida about the ashram. He says, as long as there is one person who has faith in the transformation and has aspiration for it, the ashram will remain relevant. Not only that, Sri Aurobindo himself has spoken of the ashram as the place of central influence. So, what is the ashram? It's not an institution. Institutions will come and go. They will, institutional setup is there, of course, like anywhere else. If you have to eat in dining room, you have to take a pass, you have to go to somebody, these things will change. Outer structures of institutions will change. Even some of the rules, regulations will change. That's how institutions are. But the ashram is not an institution. Ashram is a special occult formation. That's what the Mother and Sri Aurobindo have created. So they wanted humanity to enter into a kind of cocoon. Now, this is not a cocoon where you shut yourself to the world. It's like a laboratory. Some people asked me that, is it not a cocoon? And I said, no, it's a laboratory. Now, when you work in a laboratory, high-end laboratory, you have to shut yourself because you are exposed to serious radiation. So, this is the supramental laboratory. Sri Aurobindo himself has written in a letter that the ashram is a laboratory in which they have gathered different samples of humanity. And all of them are representative samples on which they were pouring the supramental force. It was not available for Earth at large, because Earth was not ready. So in this first experiment, they created a seed plot. Of course, without the Mother, it was impossible. As Sri Aurobindo himself has said, she took charge of the sadhana and took charge of the disciples and all their problems. So they started working on two ends, the Mother on the sample humanity, and Sri Aurobindo more and more on the cosmic forces, and to bring down the supramental, which was available to him individually. That's how we see in Savitri, what thou hast won is thine, but ask no more. Truth born too soon might break the imperfect earth. Earth is too weak to bear the infinite's weight. So this was the double work that the two avatars were doing. Here we see the avataric side of Sri Aurobindo. So the other two, we could say that, a great Vibhuti does these, though even in that we see rarest of rare. And yet, yes, those works could have been done by Vibhutis who were inspired by him. But this was a direct action. And here we need to understand what Sri Aurobindo has said, that the avatar comes to take humanity one step further, creation one step further, earth one step further. Humanity itself comes later, and he speaks of the parable of the 10 avatars. And the last avatar is, of course, Kalki. Often I used to wonder when I read the parable why it stops with Kalki. It's only when I read Sri Aurobindo that I understood that, well, after that, you don't need an avatar in a human body. And the mother spoke of that precisely, that I have always known that Sri Aurobindo is the last avatar in a human body. And then when we look at the way Sri Krishna speaks of the avatar, all, the period of Dharma Seglani, which we have already spoken about, and then Paritranaya Sadhunam. So, in a way, we can say that the ashram and the movement where people now more and more are turned all over the world. Who are these people? The mother says in one of her messages that the future of the earth depends upon a change of consciousness, and the change is bound to come. And but it is left to men to decide whether they will collaborate in the change or the change is thrust upon them by the power of crashing circumstances. Then, in a similar vein, but making it more personal, she says that a new world based upon truth and refusing its old slavery to falsehood is born. And then she says, in all countries, there are men who feel it. There are human beings who feel it. If they don't know it, they feel it. And it is to them we call, will you collaborate? So, Paritranaya Sadhunam is not sadhu in this sense that there are good people, good guys, and they are being tormented by the evildoers, and well, that's one part. But the permanent radical solution is the uprooting of the tendency to evil. It cannot simply be slaying the evil, but slaying the evil in its own den. But even though outwardly also the action took place, as we know, the Second World War, the worst of mankind came out. And I don't know if there is, at least not to my knowledge, if there is ever anything as comparable in terms of the nadir of human consciousness and on such a large scale. Of course, we hear about Genghis Khan, we hear about Aurangzeb, we hear about, such cruel, merciless people, even Inquisition for that matter. We hear in ancient Vedic time when the invaders came, Sahasrarjuna and some of them. Sahasrarjuna was a nice guy. He's been much, but he was prone to anger and he had his own issues. But Kal Yavan had come. He had come literally from the Yavan Desh. So there were invaders, but none of this magnitude as we see with Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. And how Sri Aurobindo and the mother fought it outwardly. Literally, they were responsible for the death of Hitler. A disciple actually saw. Sri Aurobindo spoke of it as the mother's war. And he had put his force, spiritual force, in support of the Allies, though he knew that they are also having issues and problems. But right then, the problem was that if Nazis, if Germany won, if Hitler won, let me put it like that, it was no fault of Germany. It was, Sri Aurobindo speaks of this second war very interestingly. He says Germany was trying to find its soul, but ended up finding its vital. So you see, nationalism that Sri Aurobindo speaks about is something very interesting, and it is important. Nationalism he speaks of is as the second step of Vishnu. And today we see, after nearly 100 years of all those prophetic words, that nations are trying to find their soul. That's why we see this wave of nationalism which swept across from 2014, all over, right from Japan, right up to America, through Europe and India, of course. But then he cautions, when he discusses all this in human cycle, he cautions that, nationalism is an effort to find your soul. But we may end up discovering the vital being in man. Just like the Asura, he also wants to discover who he is. Aham Brahmasmi. But he ends up calling his vital as the Brahman. And that's where the problem comes. So he says that Germany, this was what was happening. But then it should discover eventually. Every nation must discover its soul. So during that time, he had put his force fully. And, ordinary circumstances, one would have celebrated the victory and proclaimed to the world that, look, it is we. Very few people know this. Now, of course, there is a book available, Hitler's God, and many other, George von Wickham did a wonderful research, and many other books speak about it. There are movies made on what this man stood for, which at that point of time was never known. He could see behind the propaganda of Hitler's machinery. And yet, this was as if nothing. So when mother was asked, Mother, now that Hitler is gone and all these people are gone, she says, that's not the important part. Why that's not the important part? Because there is the tendency, that which created Hitler, is the end result of something which is right in the depths of the human consciousness. As long as human beings side with falsehood, as long as human consciousness sides with asuras, today or tomorrow, another Hitler will spring up. He says he was an instrument, it was important to remove him. But that's not the last victory. So the last victory was slaying the devil in his own den. So that's what we spoke about, Sri Aurobindo's plunge into the night. Very beautifully, he says that in one of his poems, poignantly rather, I would say, where he says, I made an assignation with the night. In the abyss was fixed our rendezvous. Carrying in my heart God's deathless light, I came her dark and dangerous heart to woo. And then he leaves his mind, vital, everything, and plunges into the subconscious. And the disciple asked Nirodha, Sir, you must be busy in that lotus land of the Empyrean. What about us disciples? And he says, not with the Empyrean am I busy, but with the subconscious mud and filth. See that autobiographical poem, I have been digging deep and long, mid a horror of filth and mire, a bed for the golden river song, a bed for the golden river song, a home for the deathless fire. Coercing my Godhead, I have come down into this sordid earth, ignorant, laboring, human grown twixt the gates of death and birth. Very clearly he shows now the Avataric side. See, in the entire Mahabharata and Bhagavatam, there are few moments when Shri Krishna reveals who he is. And one of them is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So we see during that period more and more suddenly Sri Aurobindo's Avataric side, when there is all this is going on, the war is going on, and at one point of time Sri Aurobindo says, we will see when, Hitler is winning on a winning spree. And then Sri Aurobindo says, we will see. It's such a powerful, and after that the whole reversal starts. So Paritranaya Sadhunam, but during that period there were people aspiring for the new world. Even now, I know many of the people who have connected with Sri Aurobindo have connected this way, because they have aspired for something new, better, beautiful, but they don't know how. At least for me it was like that I couldn't find it either in traditional religion or in philosophies, as Eastern, Western, anywhere. Mukti is the last point which makes an absurdity of the whole act of creation. So we say creation is Maya or something like that. But there are people who aspire, they want a terrestrial perfection. But how, we don't know. There have been efforts. We see in the Gospel of Death, in the dream twilight of the earthly real, death shows Savitri, see, this is the effort of all the revolutions. But Sri Aurobindo and the mother didn't want that. They didn't want to repeat the old fiasco. They say something very interesting. I don't want to give the old wine in a new bottle. Another yoga. There are many yogas. Another yoga as a path to God realization. Very often people ask these things that, it is just like the yoga of the Gita. It is just like, another way to God realization. So all that I say is you have neither read the Gita nor read this. So, or at least certainly not practiced it, because otherwise one will not make this mistake. The goal of supramental yoga itself is different to start with. No other yoga had this goal of terrestrial perfection. The last we hear of it is something which we hear in the aspiration of Agast Rishi or Yagnavalk or some of these seers who were trying to, in that the great mantra given by Vishwamitra, which Sri Aurobindo further takes it to another level. Om Tat Savitur Varam Rupam Jyotihi Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet. Now here he is invoking the most auspicious form of the supramental light. What is Rishi Vishwamitra invoking? The rays. See the difference when you read? Om Bhurbhuva Swa Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodhyat. It's the rays of that same sun. Effulgence coming into the mind, illuminating it. He is invoking Varam Rupam, the most auspicious form of the sun. So he was not satisfied with the rays. The rays are the Swarlok of the Vedic rishis. So all that he had seen, experienced, done. But he knew that the rays will be subject to the night. But the sun is not. See, it is very interesting. Sun never drowns. But the rays, we turn away from the rays. So the everlasting day he wanted to establish. So the work became twofold, which is exactly what the Gita says. On one side, Paritranaya Sadhunam. So people were getting drawn more and more, drawn by this new ideal, new aspiration. In a way, it is the old aspiration. Asado ma sadgamya. Tam soma jyotirgamya, mrityorma amritam gamya. And mankind has roamed with the light of this aspiration for thousands of years, if not, several thousands, I would say. It has roamed all around. Now the time comes for its fulfillment. And what is that aspiration? That may the kingdom of the divine kingdom, we hear about divine above and within, but may it be established here upon earth, here and now, and not only within but also outside in all we do and think and feel and act. So this was the task, and there were people who feel it. In all countries, there are people who feel it. She says, who know it, or at least feel it, sense it. And they are the ones paritranaya sadhunam. They may not be sadhu by the standard code of conduct. Maybe far from it. None of the rishis, when Sri Aurobindo describes as sadhus, this idea of sadhu comes. The rishis were very passionate people. They were very creative. If you look at the life of rishis, Sri Aurobindo says that they're intensely creative. They're intensely passionate. They loved life. They were not like the way we, but they wanted life in a different way. The mold was very different. They knew Astra Vidya, Shastra Vidya, everything they knew. They knew the various shastras. That's how they, all the subjects. That's how they could teach. They could administer. They could run institutions. So this is what we see, paritranaya sadhunam. So this was the sadhunam. In fact, the typical what we call as sadhu with a loincloth and who is fasting on every Ekadashi and Dwadashi. When mother was asked about the supramental world, she says, you know what, supramental world has very different set of values than what human beings hold. And what is it that is required? She said, what the supramental world wants is immobility, the power of immobility, that is equanimity, and along with that, wideness and plasticity. Time doesn't suffice to go into it, but several places, this has been discussed. Then she was asked, but mother, what are those things which belong to the old world which will have no value for the new world? Because he said many things that human beings value don't have much value for the new world. And she said, she laughed and laughed. She says, when I looked at it, I laughed uncontrollably for almost 2 hours. When she saw that, this is the criteria they are going to take. So what are the values? Once he has said what are the values required, plasticity, wideness, equanimity. We can add sincerity is a very fundamental quality. Of course, aspiration, faith. What is it that it doesn't value? Human beings value. And it says, for example, this ascetic idea in India. People sometimes ask, innocent question, understandable. Should we read Savitri after taking a bath? Well, that in a way was answered by Swami Vivekananda differently. Every day you must give bath to the body and the soul, but if you don't have time for both, give to the soul. So this is a very wide-ranging... so those are not the things important. Those things. Then of course he spoke about things like the sanctity of marriage. Once married in heaven, suffered on earth for lifelong. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that marriage is... I was going to say beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, whatever. That's not important. The important thing was he changed the basis. That's what is important. So basis of ordinary marriages, not in the Vedic times, but you see, she was ushering a new age again by living example. So the basis of marriage in the old world, as it had become toward the end, was, ladki badi ho gayi hai, the girl has grown up, she must be tied. Otherwise, there are dangers. Now, this was the silliest of, the worst kind of... But this is what it was, if you look squarely in the face of things. What was the other thing? You need to have children. Again, strange kind of ideal. This is not how marriages were viewed in ancient India. Marriage was not a legal document. This legal document of marriage means we mistrust each other. Why would two people ever want to have a legal document if they have trust in each other? They don't trust. See, the basis is wrong. The basis is it's a legal contract. So, I have this paper with me. I am going to slap a court case on you. See, this is what marriage has become. So what were they trying to make it? They didn't want to use the word. Like many old consciousness words they have removed. Not marriage, but yes, togetherness. But what is the basis? Spiritual, psychic, a common aspiration, the commonality of aspiration. All else is there, but with the aspiration at the core. So they changed this, and there are many such experiments they have done. If you look at Mother and Sri Aurobindo's life, people often ask were they married. No, they were not married. But if you ask Mother, she would laugh at it. But what did she say about herself? Without him, I exist not. Without me, he is unmanifest. Of course, they are the divine and the Shakti. This is the original truth where the masculine and the feminine come together for, a new creation. This is a very different thing than the way it had become. So many such old things they broke. Similarly, the basis should be not even love, human love as we understand it. Human love is very, very, faulty thing. Faulty in the sense that it's the easiest to say, but most difficult to follow from next day onwards. So it is the commonality of aspiration which is the key. And then, yes, love and togetherness and intimacy and everything else later. So in everything, sports, when people started, see how they were, by example, giving a new creation. Creative arts. So people would come, and Sri Aurobindo is the first one who distinguishes. I mean, it must have been known perhaps, I'm sure, but in modern times, who says there is an art inspired by the vital, and there is an art which is inspired by the higher worlds. And he gives examples. So in the ashram we see, he was encouraging artists, poets, the mantra must be brought down and manifested, because that's how people have, had lost the value of poetry. Somebody asked me some time back, long back, what is the point, ultimately you have to meditate, what is the use of poetry? I said, yes, exactly. This is how one of the religions said poetry is banned, music is banned, all the best thing is banned. At the end, you talk about meditation, but it's purely a selfish end. Manifestation is finished. But poetry is important even if there is one genuine poet in the world. Why it is important? Because he is uplifting the power of speech to its highest possibilities. So Savitri is not just Sri Aurobindo's own experiment at ascension. It is he has made human speech capable of being lifted to heights which it had never known. So what happens when we read Savitri, when we read Sri Aurobindo's works? Whether we understand or not, that's a later issue. None can understand Sri Aurobindo. Let me start with that very square and clear. He is too vast to be understood. Yes, we can open to him. He can reveal to us what he reveals to us. That's beautiful, that's love, that is grace. But then when we read Savitri, when we read poetry, our own possibility of speech ascends, thought ascends. Speech has several layers. It's not just that we start speaking in a rhythmic way, but our thought ascends, touched by the mantra, as when the mantra sings in yogas here, stirring the blind brain which does not understand anything. And yet it does its work. So this was another kind of action that they were engaged in. Even hardcore things, education. Sri Aurobindo had released this new idea. Where can you practice it? So this was like an experiment they started willy-nilly, because the Second World War, as the mother said, left a great package at our door. Small little, she has used a very interesting word. She speaks of a little package at our door. And these little ones who you can't talk to them about yoga. And yet they are there. So how from childhood you can prepare for a much greater. So in that sense, they were re-establishing the Gurukul, but in a new way entirely. Gurukul, literally, Sri Aurobindo is the Guru, and this is a school. And they are establishing a Gurukul, but along very different lines, along the lines of the new creation. So the whole structure, the way the outer, the way teaching is given is very, very different. That's a whole subject in its own right. Then another very interesting aspect, because ultimately it is the body which has to be transformed. So we see that with regard to the body, this physical education department came up, and boys were very happy, girls were very shy. But there were many actions that they were doing simultaneously. See, this was one thing about Sri Aurobindo and the mother, the way divine works. So we see from point to point. So our eyes are like the kingfisher at the most. Kingfisher is only focused on the little fish. But the divine's vision is like the eagle. So what does the eagle do? It's flying. It's not sitting like the kingfisher. It's seeing everything all around. And it is also seeing the fish. So while it is catching the fish and coming outside, amazing sight, it is simultaneously keeping in mind all that is around. So divine action is invariably global. So in the physical education department, many things simultaneously they started. They knew that a new age is coming in which all the gender differences, the way we understand it, have to go away. How did the mother start? In a small way, she asked the girls, come, wear your shorts, come to the playground. And the girls are very shy. And the mother had her own way. She said, you know, you are looking very pretty. Your legs are looking very pretty. That's how she started. Of course, these are not the shorts the way we understand shortest short. But they were shorts which were neat, they were smart, they were good. And because you are doing physical education, girls were taught fencing, everything which was considered as the domain of the men, she gave to women. Even departmental heads, this was not, even today, the advanced countries in the world try electing a woman president. It meets with resistance. But she started making them departmental head. I don't know what would have happened then, but I know that this itself created ripples. Even there were people who, as late as 20 years back, and they would say, I cannot work under a woman. I have actually heard somebody say this. I said, then you need not be here in the ashram, because the head of the ashram is the woman, the feminine. See, these were actions where he was completely resetting the balance of the old world. But another thing, because the boys and girls were playing together, but in a healthy way, there are two kinds of mixtures. One is when boys and girls mix up, but in a very unhealthy way. They party together, they go together, and they mix in the most lowest substratum of humanity. But here, they were mixing together in a friendly game. They were playing. So after some time, this whole impulse, this is boy, this is girl, begins to go away. If you ever go and see the ashram playground, it's something very amazing. That how her action creates this difference with which we grew up. That just begins to go away simply because of the way she has, arranged and organized things. Because in the new consciousness that was coming, girl, women, they all had to play very important play. It was, even the body had to change. It was no more going to be the third action, which she says that the body itself will begin to lose those things which we typically associate with each gender. So we see this is happening in the world, which is very interesting action of the Divine Mother. And they will come together, but as friends, not as, having children and all those things. So this was an action, but regarding the body, most importantly, people thought that, we have to remain fit and healthy. And so they questioned the mother's wisdom. There were people who asked her, new creation, all because it's a manifestation. It's not a path where you withdraw from life. So people didn't understand why there is cinema in the playground. Mother has to write a letter. Why? What is the role of music? Mother was playing music. And then Sri Aurobindo has to explain, she is bringing higher forces into play. It's not music for the sake of music. And then, in the playground, why there is so much stress on physical education? You see, ashram is a strange place where you have a playground, you call it playground. Ask anybody coming to the ashram, where is the meditation ground? So what they will say? They'll say, everywhere, anywhere you can meditate. You can meditate near the samadhi, you can meditate in the playground, you can meditate in the department, you can meditate everywhere. Why do you need a special place? But for playground, what was going on there was an experiment on the body. Because the body has to participate. The cells must open to the grace. So it was a completely new creation. At the same time, what about Vinashaya to Duskritam? It was not enough to destroy Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini. It was important to go to the roots of evil. And that's a whole saga of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, which is hardly discussed. It's about the four asuras who are at the root of creation. It is they who spring up a surprise. Those four whose names are already there. And then the mother was asked, why don't you just destroy them? See, Rama destroyed Ravana and Krishna destroyed Kansa and Shishupal and many others. So So they also destroyed Hitler and Mussolini. That's not the point. They also destroyed asuras who were behind ideas and ideologies. But that was not the point. The point was those who are at the very den, in the evil's den. So they asked, but you can go there and destroy it. See, naivety of human consciousness. So mother was asked this question. She said, yes. So what will be the consequences? Well, most of humanity will be destroyed. Why? Because they feed on the asura. Humanity, the asura of falsehood, for example, humanity lives by deception. It has become its way of life, law of life. So if that were to be destroyed right away, most of humanity will collapse. So they were giving a long rope very patiently. So paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha duskritam dharma sanstapna thai. So these two aspects of dharma, as we have said, we normally think dharma sanstapna means we will go back to the old tradition. We'll once again, in every home there will be maybe a yagashala, if not vigraha puja. No, that's not what they want. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. Sanatan Dharma is very vast. It's not even learning a new type of meditation. It's not about cult and sects. It's about dharma in its unfolding. Truth in its unfolding will bring a new manifestation. And that new manifestation is the main work of Sri Aurobindo as the avatar. As the mother said in one of the messages, each avatar is the forerunner of a more perfect future realization. But humanity, always holds the avatar of the past in opposition to the avatar of the future. Now again, Sri Aurobindo has come and his message meets the same resistance as of those who went before him. But tomorrow will prove the truth of his work, the truth of his vision, and his work will be done. So this is what we see is the new leap which Sri Aurobindo spoke about. And as the avatar, this was their work. So what really was this integral yoga? Of course, a very vast literature, but I'll just read one passage. So Sri Aurobindo has called it differently at different points of times. One place he has used the word integral yoga. Another place he has used the word supramental yoga. Third place he has used the word very simply, which to my heart is very beautiful, is the mother's yoga. All who are turned to the mother are doing my yoga. So what is this? But basically its purpose is to have a new creation, the supramental manifestation. So there, several writings, I have just picked up one of them. This 1930. So the mother in 1929 to 31 is preparing the disciples for this yoga. During that time, Sri Aurobindo writes this. And this is titled The Path. The supramental yoga is at once an ascent towards God and a descent of Godhead into the embodied nature. So, of course, all yoga is an ascent towards God. That part is common. But the descent of the Godhead in our nature, each of us represents an aspect of the divine, and that aspect must descend into us and use our body, mind, and life to manifest. That's a new Leela. The ascent can only be achieved by a one-centered, all-gathering upward aspiration of the soul and mind and life and body. The descent can only come by a call of the whole being towards the infinite and eternal divine. If this call and this aspiration are there, or if by any means they can be born and grow constantly and seize all the nature, then and then only a supramental uplifting and transformation becomes possible. So there are several stages of this ascension. He has described one of the gifts of Sri Aurobindo among the many with regard to just the yoga is the psychic being. Now, psychic being is mentioned passingly in the Upanishads and the Vedas, but they bring it to the forefront. Psychic transformation is indicated in, if you read mystic Christian literature, you will see the psychic transformation. The prayers of Saint Augustine and some other, saints which are very psychically oriented. Bhakti, the entire Bhakti movements, and some of these Sufi experiences, you will see the psychic touch. So psychic transformation is the base, but Sri Aurobindo brought it out to the forefront. What really is happening? What is this process? What is this this thing called soul? We all hear about it. can we really find the soul, and how to find it, become one with it. Then, of course, the spiritual transformation, higher ranges of consciousness, and finally the supramental transformation. So, another contribution in that sense was the entire gradation of consciousness, which Sri Aurobindo once again brought to the forefront. This opening is a throwing wide of all the nature on all its levels and in all its parts to receive into itself without limits the greater divine consciousness. The important word is without limits. This is the difficult part of this yoga. Because little bit one receives, and after that we have this tendency to slump. Human nature cannot constantly receive. It has to keep growing plastic. So in this yoga, what happens is it starts with this little, then a little more. As he says to Niruddha, that it starts like a trickle initially. It is like our municipality. Now things are much better. Okay, so this is old time. Now you have running water in India. Very soon we'll have potable water all through. But so it started. You used to start with a trickle, and we used to ask, "Pani aaya kya?" Has the water come? And then say, it has started coming. Why? Because there is steam and little bit trickle. Then after some time it would increase the flow, but intermittent. And then you see that it is coming with a great force. And you say, fill the tubs, fill the tubs. So this is exactly how yoga proceeds. First there is trickle, a little trickle here, a little trickle there, an image, a dream, a beautiful state. And then this trickle becomes a more and more continuously running supply of the divine streams. And then of course it changes into a cascade of the purifying mighty Ganges, supramental Ganges. So this has to be wide open in every aspect of nature. In the receiving, there must be no inability to contain, no breaking down of anything in the system. This is a tremendous power. We use this word so loosely. Supramental is, we can imagine it's the power of the Creator. What it means to directly live in the sun, not even under the sun. So, but Sri Aurobindo has undertaken this work, and for the divine nothing is really impossible. But the body, mind have to undergo a sufficient transmutation. See, I was very happy recently when I heard about India sending a solar probe, Surya-yan. I feel it's a very interesting something which has come. And that was the reason why Sri Aurobindo wanted India to wake up, because India has the base to be the forerunner of the new creation. It already has that base. Many things in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, faith, aspiration, surrender, we drink it with mama's milk. So, when we are told, even whatever big a scientist you may be, we recently read the case of Nambiar, and he says, yes, I believe in God. What's there? I am a big scientist. What does it matter? This is my culture. So he would wear a janeo and, do a puja and home, because this is how we have grown up. And there is already a base with the Vedas, Upanishads, the take-off point. That was the reason why the base of India was required. So Suryan literally means it's not just about the propelling fuel, the whole structure. The yarn cannot go nearby if it is composed of something which is going to melt away as it comes nearer. So this body, if we take it as a yarn, as a vehicle, if it bears the impact, this can shatter. And we see that entire thing described in the mother's whole process of transformation. That's why it's a slow process. Transformation by its nature cannot be rapid. Because if it tries to be rapid, if the pressure, not that the divine cannot do it, but human cannot receive it. It will annihilate. That's what the mother says, that world has to be ready to an extent, otherwise it will go to blazes if the divine love manifests. So there has to be a receptivity. Receptivity comes by giving oneself. So he says, no breaking down of anything. There must be an endless receptivity and always increasing capacity to bear an ever stronger and more insistent action of the divine force. And then he says, but since no human system has this endless receptivity and unfailing capacity, the supramental yoga can succeed only if the divine force, as it descends, increases the personal power and equates the strength that receives with the force that enters from above to work in the nature. So it is the divine force which does it. We open, become receptive, and all that comes up, we keep giving. The more we give, the more receptive we become, the more we are able to bear that force. And whatever is received has to be turned into the divine purposes. The moment we try to turn anything into selfish personal uses, then the problem comes. And how this is to be done? This is only possible if there is on our part a progressive surrender. The stress is on progressive, of the being into the hands of the divine. There must be a complete and never failing ascent, a courageous willingness to let the divine power do with us whatever is needed for the work that has to be done. This is the baby cat, incidentally. You let the divine power do with you whatever it wants to do. We may not understand its workings. Who can understand the working of the divine? If one were to understand it, then we would be the divine rather than mentally struggling creatures. So, with complete trust, let him do whatever is happening. This Sri Aurobindo emphasizes several places. That's why equanimity is a base. That's why Kalyan Shraddha is a must. Kalyan Shraddha is that whatever is happening for the sake of the good. Divine knows it. So, every time something happens, turn to her. That will be very simple yoga. And keep offering to her and tell her, Mother, this is happening inside me. I don't know, I don't understand. You know everything. My aspiration is to belong completely to you. And see how she will take everything and integrate with her. This is her beauty. For the powers of a mind, life, and body are bound to their own limitations, and however high they may rise or however widely expand, they cannot rise above their natural ultimate limits. But still, mental man can open to what is beyond him and call down a supramental light. This mother, of course, says, don't pull, but give yourself. And finally, he says something very interesting about the surrender. And it must be a surrender and an opening to the divine alone and to no other. This is so important because now there will be a tendency, already kind of quasi-tendency has started for mini gurus. Now in this yoga there is no guru except Mother and Shiva, and they are much more than gurus. And don't make them guru and make them feel very far Guruji. Somebody was asking me, it's such a special day. I don't know, when I see Sri Aurobindo's picture, I just feel like caressing his cheek. So I caressed his cheek. Then I realized, am I supposed to do it? So I thought that, okay, where his feet is there, I am going to touch the feet. So I asked, is it okay? I said, don't miss the opportunity. You got this feeling to caress his cheek. He is a friend. Friend and lover, the master of man and his infinite lover. He is close to our hearts, had we vision to see. Sri Aurobindo himself gave that story, Swapna. He has expanded the relations with God. This idea of Guru and Sishya, it's only one of the relations, and Sri Aurobindo says it's not the one we commonly use in this yoga. In the supramental yoga, it's a many-sided relation with the divine. The sun is the Guru, yes, in his light we see. But the sun is also the nourisher, you see in Isha Upanishad. He is the fosterer. Without him we can't live. He is the giver of plenty. He is the one who removes away all the clouds. So he is not just a guru who is giving us light, but many more things. And as the mother says, when people used to feel, this is too intense, sun. Actually, it's a very yogic truth she revealed. So people said, sun is too intense. He said, make friends with the sun. It will cure you of your anemia. See, this statement which looks very simple on the surface. It is. Look at the profundity. When the divine intensity is too much to bear, make friends with it. Make divine your friend. What will happen? Anemia. What is anemia? Your inability to contain that energy. He will cure us of that anemia. So to make him our friend, that's what she says. I don't want to be your guru. I want to be your mother. Of course, Sri Aurobindo was not comfortable when we use the word father. He said, oh my God, I don't like to be domesticated. Father, Abba. No. Friend, yes. The master of man and his infinite lover, he is close to our hearts, had we vision to see. We are lost in the mind and its pride and its passions and its pomps and its passions. We are bound by our thoughts where we hold ourselves free. So just that's what surrender is, to give oneself completely and become and belong to him. So that's what he describes even in the chapter on Avatar. That who are the ones who benefit from the avatar's coming? And there Sri Aurobindo describes what is there in the Gita. Mad bhavam, mad gata, manmana, mad bhakta, madhyaji namaskaro. They who by love, by faith, by surrender open to the avatar. So he says, don't, others are friends. Okay. A little ahead, a little behind, that's how it describes in the synthesis. But the mother is the mother. And there should be full clarity on that. Self-surrender, in the end he says, self-surrender to the divine and infinite mother, however difficult, remains our only effective means and our sole abiding refuge. So, ultimate mantra of this yoga is Ma, 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 Ma. Self-surrender to her means that our nature must be an instrument in our hands, our soul a child in the arms of the mother. So we have to redo our identity cards. Time for a new one. All this old world identities should go, and the only identity should be child of the Divine Mother. There is a letter of Sri Aurobindo where he says, if there is an unwillingness to become a child newborn to the Divine Mother, if there is a refusal of the psychic birth, then whatever siddhis you may get in the vital, however much illuminations you may have in the mind, even if the body can have astounding feats, yet nothing genuine has been done. It is only when we become a child newborn to the Divine Mother that this yoga can be done, and not otherwise. So become a child. Let us from today, this beautiful day of Sri Aurobindo's birth, may it be also our birth. Because it's only when the parents are there that the children are there. So, and let our identities from today be simply, very simply, mother's child deep within. And our instrument, our speech, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our deeds, nothing else but an instrument for the divine manifestation upon earth. The new manifestation which is not only promised but assured to us. Namaste.